Biz School is brought to you by Neon Canvas. Neon Canvas is a digital marketing boutique located in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about Neon Canvas, visit neoncanvas.com.
Welcome, here it goes. This is the 11th episode of Biz School with Alex Rasmussen, where I'm going to be teaching you all things business. And today we're going to be joined by Ryan Moynihan, the Chief Executive Officer at GAiDGE. GAiDGE is an essential business management tool that provides businesses intelligence dashboards, benchmarking, and performance comparisons against other orthodontic practices. So on the show tonight, we're going to talk to Ryan about the year that was in the orthodontic world. GAiDGE has put together this really great year in the review, and they have all these amazing metrics to share with us. So we're going to dive into those numbers and get under the hood for what was one of the wildest years in business history, at least in my business history. So Ryan, let me tell you a little bit about Ryan first, as we kind of get all this keyed up today. Ryan is joined GAiDGE as a CEO in 2017. He is bringing a very diversified background in finance, analytics, strategy, sales, marketing, business development, product management, and operations, with over 22 years experience across many Fortune 100 companies. That's incredible. Most of us will never work for a Fortune 100 company. Ryan has worked with Disney, Intel, Ernst & Young, Miller Brewing Company. Then he went on to get his MBA from Georgetown, and prior to joining GAiDGE, devoted the last 15 years of his career to the dental and orthodontic industry, working at 3M and Ormco, are just huge names in marketing and sales leadership positions. So Ryan has lived in 10 different cities throughout his professional career. He now resides in Atlanta, very near the GAiDGE headquarters. He's blessed with a beautiful family, married to his wife Maria for 11 years, and sharing the joy of their two boys, Joseph, who was 10, and Macklin, 8. Ryan enjoys spending time with the family, athletics, being outdoors, and pretty much anything sports related. Ryan, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Alex.
Yeah, man. So tell me a little bit about GAiDGE. I mean, I gave people the summary, but give us the elevator pitch. What is GAiDGE? What do you guys do?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. GAiDGE was created about 10 years ago through the brains of Mary Beth Kirkpatrick. She's a consultant that's been in the industry for over 35 years. It was her vision to automate what was going on in the practice with the practice management data for orthodontists to be able to quickly understand, where they're winning and losing in their practices based on the data that's rolling through their practice management system. So when we look at what GAiDGE has been able to accomplish over the last 10 years, we represent over 1,500 different locations in the orthodontic space, over 1,000 orthodontists. So we're able to, as you mentioned earlier, take that data, roll it up, benchmark, compare, and we are the industry leader in providing that automated performance analytics, business intelligence, and operational consulting to orthodontic practices.
Yeah, and for any analytics nerds like me who love looking at data and trying to glean, how to create marketing plans, business strategies, all the things that you can get from really deep analytical data, you'll love the GAiDGE dashboard. It's incredible. The first time I saw it, I was like, a kid in a candy store. So we really appreciate that. And the cool thing is that you did with the year in review is you went into that dashboard, and because you're tracking metrics all across the country and all these different practices, you have the ability to benchmark them against each other. What's the national averages look like? What's the percentage of case starts? What's the percentage of revenue growth, and all these things that are really great data that you as a practice owner, or maybe you're a manager of a big like DSO style corporation, you can really understand what your benchmark should look like against the rest of the country. So I think it's super powerful. And I want to dive into that 2020 year in review, Ryan, if you don't mind. So let's do that. Just give me first the 30,000 foot view, compare 2020 to 2019.
Sure. Well, obviously, we all lived through an unprecedented year for orthodontics. Last year, something that none of us could have ever predicted. And so we all had to adjust, pivot, adapt. So as we look at that, we take the industry, overall the industry was down last year, but obviously there was a shutdown. And that's really, really hard to make up 6 to 10, 12 weeks of production, depending upon how long these practices were shut down. But the way we looked at the data is that we segmented the year into 3 different segments. So we kind of have our pre-pandemic, which would be considered January and February. Then we look at, obviously, the shutdown. We won't talk much about that because there wasn't really a lot going on other than, folks really pivoting and trying to figure out new and different ways to run an orthodontic practice, which obviously, in any times of challenge like that, it's going to make everyone better at what they do. And so I think we definitely saw that resiliency through the orthodontic space last year. And then we've got that last section where we call like post-shutdown or recovery is the way I would like to look at it. And that's June through December of the last year. And you can actually even further sub-segment that into, recovery being June through maybe September, end of Q3. And then when we look at Q4, you could kind of call that maybe the new normal. But what I'll do is I'll kind of bucket the back half or the back 7 months of the year as far as, presenting the data and what it looks like from that standpoint. So
yeah, great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's jump into pre-pandemic.
Okay.
Talk
Perfect.
to me about Q1 2020. What were we seeing?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, and it's not the full Q1 because obviously in the middle of March things started to shut down, so there was some production loss at that point. But what we see from a GAiDGE standpoint, and as I mentioned earlier, is that we have the ability to aggregate and roll up all of this industry data and look at what is going on in the marketplace. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And any GAiDGE user that subscribes to the service has that power as well to benchmark themselves, not only to the USA averages, but also to like practices. So if you're a single doctor practice, you can compare yourself to other single doctor practices or multi-doctor practices. You can also do it by region too. So if you're in the SAO, we have all those practices that are in the SAO rolled up, and you can aggregate and compare yourself as well. So there's a lot of different ways to benchmark yourself depending upon where you are in the country. But if we really want to simplify this and look at 2020 and how we kind of take a first pass at what's going on in the industry, we track 5 key metrics. And those metrics are net production, net collection, new patient calls, exams, and starts. And so if you think about, obviously how we make money is by driving production and collection. But then when you think about a funnel of patients and how you get patients in to convert into that net production, net collection, it's all about what we call a consumer conversion waterfall, which consists of new patient calls, which is your phone ringing? How are patients finding your practice? And once they do find your practice, they connect with you. How effectively do you move them into an exam? And then once you get them into that exam room, how effectively do you move them into a start, which obviously that converts into the revenue being generated through your practice. So those are the 5 metrics that we look at for overall industry health, which is net production, net collection, new patient calls, exams, and starts. And within the GAiDGE software, we've strategically laid that out in our dashboards to make it very easy to visualize that for your practice on a daily basis when that data uploads on every night. So as we look at January and February, we'll kind of look at that as the first segment of the year, what we call the normal, or what was the prior normal. And so the way the industry started off in 2020 was pretty flat. So across all 5 of those metrics, if depending upon which one we look at, the range was anywhere from plus or minus 1% compared to 2019. So, that's kind of a slower start to the year. Usually the industry is about 3-4% across a lot of these different metrics, but we were seeing definitely a little bit slower growth as we started off the year. And maybe that was some of the foreshadowing of what was to come. But obviously, we were still in offices, people were still living normal lives, and everyone was producing the way, we normally would do that. So the industry shutdown happened, I think, around March 16th. So what we saw is that most offices lost about the final 12 days of production in March or Q1. And so obviously that, losing 12 days out of the quarter had a negative impact on the overall quarter. So when we look at those 5 metrics, net production was down about 6.5 points. Net collection was barely up. It was up 0.3. New patient calls were down 8.4, exams 11.6, and starts were down about 9 points, 9%. Obviously, the collection number might stand out there. That remained positive because even though, we were hit with the pandemic, a lot of folks lost their jobs. It did show that, many of the patients were still able to continue paying, at least in those early days of the pandemic before it really set in, probably in April and May. We saw a little bit of a hit to that. So
yeah,
that's area one.
Yeah, and in my opinion, not to interrupt that, but just to touch on that point, is that the way that orthodontics has set up their business model, right, where you pay over the time of the life of the treatment, really allowed for a lot of resiliency in the industry because of the ability that, okay, yes, we don't have new production coming in, but we can still pay our bills and still pay our employees and still kind of maintain a way of life here as we've got those collection dollars still coming in.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
really important measurement to look at when you think about the way that orthodontics was able to rebound. And we'll talk about that rebound.
Yeah, absolutely. So then obviously the shutdown segment of the year, there's not a ton to talk about other than, this was a great time for orthodontists to look inward, understand, I know most practices took advantage of the PPP funding that was out there. But it was also a time, however long you were shut down, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, you were able to really evaluate your internal processes and systems and, how am I going to have to pivot in this potentially new world out there? And I think, what we saw in the back half of the year is that was a ton of great work that happened through that process, a lot of resiliency in the ortho space. And it definitely played out in the numbers that, we saw in the post shutdown.
Yeah, and I would love to go back and dig into the numbers. We didn't do this before, but we really preached hard to our clients that, look, if all of your competitors are pulling out their marketing dollars right now, that's the time for you to be pouring your marketing dollars in, because it's a lot cheaper to gain market share when all your competitors are going out. So we saw some of the biggest record-breaking months in a lot of our practices in June and July because they had stayed invested in their marketing through March, April, and May.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We saw the same thing. One of the areas we have now within Gage that we've added is, we actually link into your accounting system. So QuickBooks, Desktop, QuickBooks Online. So we're able to kind of track, those practices that put forth the marketing spend during that time. And we can see that direct ROI and, how many new patient starts did those dollars translate to, how many exams, how many new patient calls as well. So that was a really cool thing for us that, we've added to the software sense that we've been able to see. But as we start looking at the back half of the year, I talked a lot about orthodontists having to look inward, pivot. We did see a lot of our customers and new customers come our way as a function of, really needing to understand metrics and their data and leveraging that data to make decisions as we move forward. There was a lot of uncertainty coming out of the pandemic, and there's still a lot of uncertainty now. I mean, obviously, this thing has lasted over the course of a year as we roll into March here pretty soon. So that has been definitely something that we've seen. A lot of orthodontists really start to take notice of the metrics in the practice and really understand what that looks like. So, like I said, we usually look at this stuff on a quarterly basis, but we thought, it was really important to kind of say, hey, let's segment this thing and really understand, once everybody was back open, what does that number look like? And Alex, to your point, in those first 2 months, whether you call that pent up demand, continuing that marketing plan, folks trying to get back to normal, we did absolutely see a surge in June, July in a lot of practices. But when we look at it in aggregate, when we look at those last 7 months of data, what we're seeing is net production was up 12%. Net collection, was up 1.4. So if we look at net collection, it's still positive versus negative, but it's also a lower percentage year over year because we did lose 6 to 8, 6 to 12, depending upon how long it would close, weeks of lost production in March through May. So that's definitely going to have an impact on that metric. New patient calls up 3.7%. Exams are up 3.1%. And what really spiked, what's really interesting here is that adult exams we're up 14.7%. So what we saw here is that, maybe folks that, still were employed, they weren't spending those dollars maybe on vacations. Adults were, there's something that is called the Zoom effect, where everyone now is looking at themselves every day in Zoom meetings versus maybe in the morning in the mirror or when you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. So people are definitely noticing their smile and what potentially could be wrong with it or opportunities for improvement. So to see that spike in adult exams, to jump up almost 15 points in the last half of the year is, definitely something's going on there. Overall total starts up 10 and a half points. So that's unheard of, across the United States, the entire US. I mean, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is that starts are usually maybe 3 to 4% on average. And then what we did see is a surge in aligner starts. So that's probably indicative too with the adult exam spike. And, anybody, obviously what's going on in the marketplace now is a lot of manufacturers have entered the space with an aligner solution. We're seeing that, from the major manufacturers. And then also, with Invisalign, I mean, you've seen their Q3 and Q4 earnings announcements and what it's done to their stock. So what's cool about Gage, even in the aggregate, is that, we're kind of seeing what's going on with some of these companies' growth play out, in the overall aggregate data as well, which is pretty cool. So
yeah, I'm fascinated by this growth in adult orthodontics, and it's really incredible as a marketer because immediately you want to hone in on personas, right? We want to identify the teenager, we want to identify the young professional, we want to identify the mom. But now, I mean, you can market in orthodontics from 7 years old to 77 years old. I mean, so many people are thinking about their smile, and clear aligners have become so accessible to people that these numbers, it doesn't surprise me that the Zoom effect, along with the ability for orthodontics to market through an entire multiple segments of personas, is really incredible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know of really any other industry that is able to do that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've worked with you guys as well, as far as, some of the persona data. I know you guys are looking at that. We've showed you some of that data as well. And it's fascinating that, there's some really distinct segments that are actually coming in and saying yes to orthodontic treatment and saying not. And so it's, especially with digital technologies that we all have, it makes it really easy to really maximize that marketing dollar that you're spending by really targeting those folks directly.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. Now, you guys saw a couple areas that did decline in 2020. Let's talk about those.
Yeah. So, if we look at overall 2020 versus 2019, there's a couple areas that are down significantly. So the first one is child exams. So that's down about 5%. And that could potentially be explained by, some parents may have had safety concerns coming in, bringing their child in treatment back into the offices, as obviously orthodontics is not something that you would necessarily have to get done today. It's more elective. So that's something that, potentially could have impacted that. Maybe there's a financial impact as well. We know there's a lot of folks that lost their jobs, and that could have been, something that played into that decision. But, to see child exams, down 5.5 points or 5 points is really rare. Usually that drives the overall exam growth in the industry. So that's one area that we saw that was down. The next area is part of that consumer conversion waterfall that I talked about earlier. So if we think of new patient calls to exams to starts, that ratio as we move through each of those categories, what we like to see is that the ratio of exams to new patient calls is about 90%. So there's a 10% fall off. In 2020, it was about 83%. So 83 versus the benchmark of 90. So you can see there that there's 7 percentage points. So if you think about, for every 100 patients, coming through the door, we would expect, or every 100 patients that call our practice, we would expect 90 to come through the door. We were only seeing 83 of those. So if you think about, you didn't have an opportunity even to convert those other 7. And, each one of those 7 at an average case fee of, just call it $5,000 to be rounding here, that's potential $35,000 of production that, might have been missed as a function of that. So I think that's another area, that practices should really be aware of, is what is that ratio? And, looking at the Gage data, it's very clear to see how many people call versus how many come in for the exam and how many come in for the start. And to be able to monitor that and track that on a monthly basis is really important to make sure that your systems and processes are in place, to make sure that you're maximizing that.
Yeah. And to that end, to that point, on the child exam piece, like, this is why it is so important for you to start early observation on children 7 and plus. You've got to have a kids club. You've got to be talking to parents who her kids are age 7, so that you can make sure that you're top of mind through these pandemics and through issues like that, and you're always filling that child funnel because, as you know, the market share in adult ortho is growing. You can't take your eye off the prize. That, and people have a lot more options, right? So they're sitting around, they're at home. The chances of them just filling out a form to one orthodontist is very slim. They probably, talk to Smile Direct Club. They probably talk to an orthodontist. They probably ask their dentist. And so now they have all these other options on the table for orthodontic treatment, which is why you can see that number go from 90% down to 83% because you're not capturing them before they went into your competitor. So it's so important for you to be on top of these exams. As soon as that lead comes in, you got to be talking to these people. You got to be getting them on the books. And then you also got to really have a great observation period and a plan to get kids age 7 into your office and then moving them into treatment as they grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And another point there too, I mean, just with the change, it's really important to over communicate to the parents around infection control and the processes and protocols that you put into your practice to make sure that that child will be safe. And also, virtual consultations is another area that came into play. And, I know a lot of practices have leveraged that. So I think those are a couple of areas too, the over communication, making sure your child is safe, and then the virtual consults that also can help drive that number and that ratio to success.
Those are really great points. Orthodontists, if you're listening to this now, share it with a friend, because this is really, really good information nuggets you're getting right now. Tons of great ideas going back and forth. So let's talk about case conversion, Ryan. What did we see in that area?
Yeah, and so in 2020, one of the areas that saw a massive jump was case conversion. And so in the aggregate, we saw that jump by 4.5 percentage points to almost 70%. Usually it tracks around 65. So basically the calculation for that is new starts minus your phase 2s divided by number of exams. So for that to jump up that much was definitely very noticeable. And if you look at that, obviously there was a lot of pivoting, a lot of changing in the processes, whether it be virtual tools, things like that. But also too, I think what we've seen in the past is that patients will shop practices. You might get 2 or 3 different opinions. With COVID, I think a lot of the research was being done in advance. And so when that patient hit the doorstep of the orthodontic practice, they were ready to start treatment if they were going to take the time to come into the practice. So I think that's one of the contributing factors. So obviously, orthodontists benefited greatly from that. And, if you were the one that had the patient come in, they weren't shopping the other 2, then, it was a great thing for your practice. But overall, in aggregate, it was great to see that number jump up.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the number that we're always targeting. I mean, it's your close percentage, right? And the more cases that you can close, the people that are right in front of you, that's the low hanging fruit, man. That's the money that you want. So I'm really excited to see that number headed where it was. So give us the total view. We're back in the airplane. We're at 30,000 feet. We're looking down on 2020. What did it look like?
Yeah. So as we said, we broke it into 3 segments, Q1, which we'll just compromise, or we'll just, say it's January, February, basically flat. Then we had our shutdown period, which we call May or March, April, May. We saw, some practices lose 100%, down 96%. We know that was just a tough time for the industry. And then obviously the resurgence that we saw in the back 7 months of the year. So if we aggregate all that up and we look at, full 2020 over 2019 across these 5 metrics, you're going to see net production that ended up down 7.6%. Net collection was down 5.6. New patient calls were down 13.1. Exams were down 13.1, and starts were down 8.4. So I think that was, looking at that in aggregate, practices saw some of the greatest challenges, just kind of getting more prospects into their office during the time. But we're also fortunate to see smaller declines in collection, which is evidence that the majority of patients in treatment were also fortunate enough to be able to continue to spend as planned and continue to be treated as planned. So in aggregate, obviously a tough year. We all have gone through it in one form or another, but all things being equal, to finish down only in the single digits on some of the key metrics, is probably a big win for the industry.
Yeah, I'd say so. And when you look at those metrics and the way they're down, you can easily attribute that to the shutdown. I mean, I think it's very simple to look at that and say if we'd have been open all of March and April, that we'd have blown out 2019 in 2020. So let's talk about 2021. What's it going to look like? What should practices be thinking about as we head into this? Well, we're into the first quarter as we get into 2021 and further.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things we all learned in 2020 is that, expect the unexpected. So, we never know what's going to happen now. We would never thought what we've dealt with for the last 12 months would have happened, but it did. And we've all, become stronger and smarter and survived it, in one form or another. So, but if we break this down from an orthodontic perspective, what we think is really important is go back to that basic business model, that consumer conversion waterfall. What are you doing right now to get patients to call your office? And when they call your office, how are you converting them to get them into the office for an exam, whether that's the traditional way or whether that's through virtual? And then once they are in the office for an exam, what are your processes and systems that you're looking to convert them to a start, which ultimately drives your business model, it drives production. And so I think, obviously from our perspective, when we look at that data on a more regular basis, and we coach our practices that way, kind of what gets measured gets improved is one of our basic philosophies here. So being able to actually understand that, and one of the things I challenge, any orthodontist when we're speaking about GAiDGE and the data that we have is, do you know your exam to new patient add ratio? Do you know your start to exam ratio as you look through that consumer conversion waterfall? Because we've done this analysis, and you project forward, like I gave the example of losing 7 out of 100 potential prospects, which could be 35,000. But, a lot of practices obviously have 4 or 5 to 1,000 new patient calls per year. So if you're losing, 7 or 8 per 100, that can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost production. So it's a big deal. So, for us data can be overwhelming. Totally understand that. We're trying to really help you simplify that with these, 5 critical metrics, but specifically focusing on the consumer conversion waterfall and how that can, really be a good leading indicator for, if you're not getting patients to call your practice, what are you doing from a marketing standpoint, right? I mean, obviously, working here with Alex and Neon Canvas, are you making sure that you're targeting the right market, to get those patients into the office? And then if you're not converting them to an exam, is there something going on in your process there? And if you're not converting them to start, you got to continue to look deep within your practice and understand that. But without the data, without understanding where you're at, you don't really have a baseline for where to begin. So
And GAiDGE is, GAiDGE is literally the definition of the law of averages. I mean, you can look at that and see what the law of averages are. The more that you fill up the top of your funnel, the more that comes out of the bottom of the funnel. And then you can look at all the metrics along the way to see how you get more out of the bottom of the funnel, plug your holes, right? So that's what GAiDGE is so great at showing people how to do. Ryan, tell people how to find GAiDGE. Who should they connect with if they're not already a GAiDGE user?
Sure. Yeah, appreciate that, Alex. Got a great website that I think can give you a pretty good overview of what GAiDGE is all about. It's gaidge.com, GAIDGE.com, a little different spelling than you might think GAiDGE is spelled. And once you're there, you can click on request a demo, and our sales team will and marketing team will be with you immediately to be able to show you the ins and outs of the system. So.
Awesome. I love to, before I wrap up, I always love to do something fun with my guests. Go talk to GAiDGE, go to their website, make sure that you're connected with them. If you're in ortho practice, this is an easy spin for you. So here's what I want to do. I call it 3 things, Ryan. I give all of my guests 3 things, and I ask them to choose one that they want for themselves, discard one, throw in the trash, can't do anything with it, and then you're going to give one of them away. So I'm going to give you 3 things. You're going to tell me what you want to do with them. So I've always put $1 million as the first one, but I'm going to change that up, and I'm going to make it 200 Bitcoin, which at the time of this recording would be worth about $11 million. So you get 200 Bitcoin, a private jet, because you travel all the time. You're like me, you're always in the air, or a professional sports career. Now, you can't keep them all. I know you'd like to keep them all, but you got to keep one, discard one, and give one away. What are you doing? 200 Bitcoin, a private jet, and a professional sports career.
Okay. Well, if my in my overview, you said I'm all things sports, so I probably would have to lean towards that. And I hope that I would be decent enough to have a long living career that would, include sports plus maybe some endorsements. So therefore I would discard the plane. I would give the Bitcoin away, and then hopefully the money that I could make being a professional athlete could actually go get all three of those back. So we'll see.
I nailed it. I gave you the one you wanted. I love it. I always switch one of those up and try to see if I can get you to bite on that nugget. So you play point guard for the Atlanta Hawks or quarterback for the Patriots. I guess one of those two, right?
Maybe the Broncos. That's my team.
Broncos. There you go. Okay. Perfect. I love it. Well, the Broncos need a good quarterback.
They need a quarterback. Well, yes. Yes.
They had a couple good ones along the way.
Long time going.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining me and coming on the show to talk about GAiDGE and the year that was. We really, really appreciate that. We don't want you to miss the next episode, so punch that 5 stars. Subscribe to the podcast. We'd really appreciate it. Share it around. This has been a great episode. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. We really enjoyed it. It means a lot. And the rest, as they say, is history.